In the US, there's been a hilarious, buzzwordy sort of term surfacing lately among mainstream news outlets that they call
quiet quitting.
And from that phrase, you might be led to believe it means, like, not showing up to work or coming in whenever you want instead of following regular hours, basically allowing yourself to be fired without having the motivation to up and quit. But no, that's not what it means at all. Really, it refers to when employees will do their job to the extent they're required, and nothing more. Yes, this is seriously something people are complaining about, and you already know what group is trying to push that idea the most. Jaded business jockeys in their mid-50s or older that take any opportunity to claim the current generation is a bunch of lazy, entitled slackers. And that's kinda what's so funny about the claim to begin with, that we should consider it a bad thing in the first place, or that the newest generation are the ones to have come up with it. Do these people seriously think that back in the 80s, monotonous number crunchers preferred to go beyond expectations and work overtime for no extra pay? What are you, an idiot? No one's ever enjoyed the idea of giving their all to a job they hate, and no one should be required to do more than their job description entitles. Especially teens or young adults in fast food or retail or whatever other demeaning job society lets you have at that age. And to be honest, isn't doing the least amount of work for the most profit possible the real American dream? Logically, you'd want to feel accomplished by completing a certain amount of hard labor as a roadmap to your success, plus it makes for a good up-and-comer story for your presidential campaign. But as Americans, we've always had the desire to avoid overexerting ourselves for jobs we hate. Portrayed best in movies like Office Space and Falling Down, they give a comedic spin on how deep/forced devotion to a job can drive people to insanity, extreme boredom, or never-ending anxiety. We shouldn't idolize pushing ourselves to an unhealthy level just to appease people that won't appreciate us or our work. Otherwise, we could end up like Japan, and that's a world I don't want to live in. Hold on a second, I'm getting sleepy. Just give me a sec.
はい。すみません。元気ですか？よく眠れましたか？決様、仕事に戻る。このオフィスで私はあなたの神様です。
はい。
さらに行こう。
What you just saw and heard, in what was most likely severely butchered Japanese, was a comedic, though honestly not too exaggerated representation of the average office worker in the land of the rising sun. Though I guess for those few native Japanese citizens among my viewership, no, I'm sure there are plenty of you, you don't need me to spell it out, seeing as for several generations over there, it's been a societal norm to overwork yourself in the interest of quote-unquote, being a team player that pulls your own weight. Just take a look at this 100% real schedule for a manga artist, and there are tons of others that follow this sort of structure week by week for upwards of years or potentially decades. You ever wonder why Hunter x Hunter is coming out as slowly as it is? Really, you should be questioning how One Piece has gone on for over 1,000 chapters without its creator suffering serious health problems or going on an extended break. And though, to be honest, in the more typical workspace these kind of hours are less frequent, it's still not impossible. You're expected to work overtime hours with no additional pay, you're seen as lazy if you spend too long taking breaks or even checking your phone, you're considered disrespectful if you don't follow upper management to an absurd degree and allow yourself to get pushed around. Hell, it's so bad the workers straight up dying from overexhaustion is such a common occurrence they have a word for it, karoshi. It's a stigma ingrained into their culture that takes the ideas of being a cog in an ever-moving machine and respecting your elders to the worst possible degree. And so thankfully, as the newest generation has entered the workforce, they've started to realize how absolutely insane this line of thinking is and are slowly taking precautions to keep it from continuing on. But right now, the country is still in a transitional period where some people can live their dreams taking alternate career routes, and others are stuck working long hours in soul-crushing conditions under seemingly incompetent, uncaring bosses. So who better to make a comedic but realistic deconstruction of this period than Sanrio, the creators of Hello Kitty and Gudetama? Alright. Beginning life as a bunch of 1-minute shorts before transitioning to a full-blown seasonal Netflix series, allow me to introduce you to Aggressive Retsuko, or as it's more commonly abbreviated, Aggretsuko, a series focusing on the daily misadventures of a red panda accountant that secretly uses death metal as a way to relieve her stress while trying to find any way out of her monotonous desk job. And as you might surmise from that description, the series is a radical departure from everything Sanrio has been known for prior to its release, having built up a brand around cutesy, wholesome, family-friendly content. But in a way, that was part of the series' genius. Here we are watching a workplace comedy about a struggling 20-something living day-to-day at her shitty job, and it's all done with the exaggeration and style of a cutesy anime. It makes such a strong impression from the second you realize what the series is about. And though you laugh at the oxymoronic concept at first, the further it goes on, the more you understand it wasn't just done as a shocking, funny twist on expectations, but also for legit reasons. Of course, there are obviously all the animal puns and fun archetypes you can use to help characterize the cast. A rude pig boss and a weasel for his sideman, a hippo that spreads all the gossip because she can't keep her mouth shut, the list goes on. But more than that, it better allows the series to take on a variety of tones and shifts without feeling unnatural. Aggretsuko has the ability to be silly if it wants, which it often does, but it's never so over the top about its often dry comedy that the staff can't bring the mood back down to be serious or even potentially stressful when need be. There are so many times the series will go from relaxed and in the moment to brutally honest and down to earth, it's striking, but you never get the impression it was out of left field or unwarranted. That's just how the show operates, balancing menial work and friend drama with serious consequences and struggles through the usage of great characterization and relatable situations. Really, the way Aggretsuko can blend comedy and wholesome content with realistic, uncomfortable scenarios and genuinely unnerving suspense is nothing short of astoundingly unique for its genre. Not to mention it's helped by an iconic soundtrack that captures all those emotions phenomenally. It's no wonder the series was such an out-of-the-gate success when it premiered. It might have commented on Japanese office culture more than anything, and in a hilarious way at that, but the same worries and anxieties could also be universally applied to tons of people all over the world in similar spots. And the messages the show gave were so applicable to young adults and their issues, it was hard not to see what was so special in that debut season. Sanrio had created what pretty much felt like a cartoon for adults, but not just the "I said the fuck word, this is so edgy" kind of adults. It had something to say about the way this generation thinks, and spoke to us on our level about problems everyone has to go through, or probably will have to go through on the road to true adulthood. You knew what the writer Rercho wanted to say, and he conveyed it through endearing characters we'd come to love and seriously relate to by the end of that season. So much akin to the series itself, its themes came off so naturally, you couldn't help but subconsciously understand. And boy, did the anime community understand that special connection. If you were there to see it back in 2018, there wasn't a big anime YouTuber who wasn't talking about it, though personally speaking, I never really watched those videos. Instead, I just kept watching the show and passively saw as people continued discussing it, or at least up to a point. And that point was season 4, the occasion where an Aggretsuko season came out, and no one said much of anything about it, but what they did say was mixed. Whereas previously the last 3 seasons had been met with varying degrees of critical acclaim, no one quite knew what to make of Aggretsuko Season 4. There was something off about it that no one could quite put into words at the time, and neither could I, as in all honesty I had skimmed the whole thing during downtime before Christmas break, so I just sort of shrugged at it and said, yeah, it was pretty good, right? And moved on with my day. But now that it's been a good year since that season came out, with the final portion of the anime releasing shortly before or after this video if all goes to plan, I'm now pretty certain in my opinion of Aggretsuko's 4th season. It's not good. And worse than that, it's not good as a continuation of Aggretsuko as a series in pretty much any way. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's less than not good. Or as some might dare to call it, bad. But to tell you all the ways that Season 4 went wrong and did Aggretsuko dirty as a narratively and thematically progressing series, you also gotta know all that it did right. And baby, they did a whole lot of right. Going all the way back to Season 1. Rapturous Roar.
So riddle me this one, smart guy or girl. We don't discriminate here. What would be the perfect way to kick off an amazing series?
Sounds like a thought-provoking question, doesn't it? But I'll go ahead and tell you because it's actually super simple. It takes the perfect first episode. And I already know exactly what you're thinking. Braxton, you are so sexy, it should be illegal, but stay on track, okay? We're talking about the perfect first episode of a series, and shockingly, perfect in these terms isn't quite as difficult as it sounds. All the staff need to do is put out an introduction that's able to establish everything the series is about, at least in the beginning. The main characters, setting, tone, atmosphere, and overarching conflict if it has one. Basically, do the same thing a pilot's meant for when pitched to networks and sell us on what the show is about. But unsurprisingly, while perfect in this context isn't as literal as it might sound, that can still be a really difficult thing to pull off, especially if those aspects of the series are still getting worked out and writers are getting used to how these characters should normally act. For example, look at the opening episode of BoJack Horseman, often considered by fans to be the absolute worst of the whole series. But it's not because the episode fails at everything. It introduces a majority of the star cast, BoJack, Mr. Peanut Butter, daughter, Diane, Princess Carolyn, and Todd. It sets up the conflict that Bojack is a former TV star looking for a little shred of relevance in the form of a memoir. We get the setting is an alternate version of Hollywood. Those pieces are all there. But where the first episode of Bojack fails is in tone and atmosphere. Or more specifically, it's too bland in its execution. For those that have watched through the entirety of Bojack, they know that it's a generally comedic, but also heart-punching series with themes of nihilism, delusionment, addiction, and depression. But also that we have the ability to change and improve ourselves over time as long as we have the drive to keep at it day after day. It's a show that thrives on building relationships between the characters to better understand how they function as people, and will bring back seemingly inconsequential characters to let us know that when the main cast does something, it'll have repercussions in the long run. And almost none of that is present in season 1 until the final few episodes, where the writers finally understood how they wanted the series to function and ran with it to create 5 of the best seasons of TV animation in recent time. Seasons so good that when fans go back to the beginning and binge watch it to relive all that great content, they forget that the show started out as a simplistic, cut-and-dry comedy, which is admittedly Bojack's weakest element in the early seasons. It's not terrible, but by God, it is not Bojack, at least how we've come to know him. And that tells us how easy it is to mess up the first episode in retrospect without a previously established vision. All it takes is one of those elements I mentioned to be messed up, and the whole structure can fall on top of itself. So that's why I find it so impressive that Agretzko nails what it's about from the instant we're watching, and it isn't something that happened by accident either. Rather, it's all thanks to the help of one man. A man who's been working on the project of Agretzko ever since it was conceptualized and has served as the sole director, writer, and almost sole animator of the whole series, Rarcho. Let me repeat. He is the sole director, writer, the death metal voice of Retzko, his wife does the voice of Retzko herself, and he animates the series almost entirely on his own. And when you learn that little tidbit, the narrative cohesion of Agretzko makes all the more sense. It's one man's creative vision, free of executive intervention or ambiguity about any step of the process because he's always there, leaving no stone unturned to guarantee it's done the way he imagined. Plus, he worked on 100 shorts over the course of 2 years beforehand. It's no surprise he'd have the perfect opening ready to go. So how does Agretzko hit all the marks for a great first episode? Well, for starters, it naturally introduces the key characters and setting without needing to get complicated. In terms of episode plots, it's about as basic as they come, taking us through Retzko's average day in the city from the moment she wakes up till the instant she goes home. And that's part of what's so perfect. It's a day in the life, and therefore we can meet the cast in a sort of rapid-fire approach that matches how co-workers often see each other for brief exchanges throughout the workday. It's such a simple, almost boring way of doing things, but it's thanks to that simplicity that, to the contrary, we learn everything that needs to be known in an impressively smooth way. Retzko is a cynical, stressed, overly responsible office worker that had her dreams of a happy career crushed from the second she literally jumped the steps to adulthood and twisted her ankle on the way down. Now, having been disillusioned by the world that so cruelly turned against her, Retzko has to manage the anxiety she feels on a day-to-day basis from an overbearing society, performing death metal karaoke in secrecy to keep up the persona of a team player that takes everything as it comes. And while we aren't told this directly, we can pick up on that it inadvertently also shuts out the moral support of her co-workers and friends. The best girl fellow cynic that takes pleasure in hating on those she thinks deserves it by obsessively analyzing their social media, Finico, and a modest guy trying to keep in the boss's good graces that often worries for Retzko, Haida. However, what they can all agree on is that they have a similar distaste for the co-workers giving Retzko anxiety. Tone, their sexist, gluttonous boss, Komiya, his Weasley sidekick, Tsunoda, the local suck-up / social media whiz, and to a lesser extent Kabai, the unintentionally annoying blabbermouth of the office. It all functions together in a way that makes you think, these guys have dealt with this same routine for a long time, and that's exactly what it's trying to say. The Retzko's had to deal with all of this for far too long and wants to make a change, even if she doesn't know it right now. And we get the sense it's beating down on her unbelievably hard thanks to the pace, which is faster than the average anime, running for 15 minutes instead of the typical 24. That's way less time than normal to communicate all it wants to say on an individual level, so each story from beginning to end has to be optimized, meaning much of the show can be pretty fast in execution, and that's by design. It's not so quick it's impossible to keep up, but it's constrained enough that Rarcho can't waste any time and has to give every scene a purpose, so that leads to a tight, structured viewing experience that matches the feeling of Retzko making it through the day. Plus, it creates an extra feeling of ease whenever the episode does slow down to give us room to breathe. And that leads me into the real kicker for what makes this series so interesting, even from the first episode: its conveyance of tone and theme. Agretzko, much like previously mentioned BoJack Horseman, is a comedy series that turns out to be way more than any of us were led to believe. However, unlike BoJack, Agretzko knows that's what it is from the beginning, and so instead of waiting half a season or more to go from episodic, humorous content to including the nitty-gritty, it weaves that harshness of reality into its comedy through relatable cringe. After all, Rarcho doesn't want to overwhelm us with the depressing side too much too quickly, so the first episode relays it as an underlying but ever-present issue we'll come to understand further if we keep watching. engaging, which is exactly what this needs to do, entice viewers to keep going. And to me, more than anything else, it's that which drew people in. That theme of the world trying to get Retsuko down that's never not at the forefront, so her struggles, while usually played up for laughs, are also taken seriously enough that we understand it's a problem. We can see an outline of the instantly relatable issues it's going to tackle through characters we've already come to find charming and fun after 15 minutes, so what better word is there to call it than enticing? So much has been left to be developed, and the big picture isn't filled in yet, but the narrative, as well as the characters' struggles, are set up so well, you feel a connection after no time at all. And that's a feeling the series is able to maintain over the course of the whole season through its usage of a process I like to call loose linear storytelling. Or maybe there's another actually defined name for it, but I don't want to look it up, so yeah. Hopefully I can go ahead and assume that you, the viewer, know the difference between linear and episodic storytelling, seeing as most of us have passed 6th grade English. But just in case, linear is when a story continues on from episode to episode, building on previous events to tell one continuous plot, while episodic refers to series that have conflicts within the confines of an episode or two, and the status quo resets at the start of the next. So therefore, loose linear storytelling fits in the in-between of those two extremes, taking elements from both, but not following the traditional format of either. And how do you pull that off with such an oxymoronic concept? In Agretzko Season 1's case, it's by taking the structure of episodic storytelling, making each individual episode feel like its own thing without the need for any context beforehand, but additionally including the status quo changes of a linear story, connecting those episodes together by relating the conflict of each story to Retsuko's ever-changing mentality and outlook on life, which in turn ends up creating a much larger conflict to deal with later in the season. And that all truly gets moving when, after the first episode setting the state of affairs, Retsuko reunites with an old friend of hers that does whatever she pleases, doesn't care about proving herself to anyone, and hardly bothers with serious obligations. In short, she's everything Retsuko longs for but isn't able to do because she's responsible and knows it isn't smart. But then, the friend offers Retsuko a position at her newly formed company that sounds like a dream come true, and though it ends up going nowhere when Retsuko realizes it's still a pipe dream, the hype she feels at the idea really gets her thinking. The reason she wanted to join that new company so badly to begin with is because she hates her current job and all that comes with it. The bullshit she takes from higher-ups, the absolute humdrum of her life, and the excruciating pain of keeping it all together without telling anyone. So Retsuko decides she wants to change that by looking for ways out, leading us into subsequent stories and a deeper exploration of not only Retsuko herself, but those around her as she tries to achieve the goal to varying degrees of success. It's not exactly a step-to-step process though, more so a side project she's got in the background while dealing with other issues that turn into something prominent over time. For instance, Retsuko is in desperate need of money after giving a big gift for a wedding, and in conjunction with her wanting to quit her job, she comes up with the idea of marrying herself off to a super rich guy to get out of the work entirely. But how does a 25-year-old bachelor attract a rich sugar daddy to quit her job for? What else but getting in shape with yoga? And yet, it's funny how Retsuko immediately goes for the most shallow option possible, but beyond being funny, it's also where she meets Gori and Washimi, two higher-ups that work in the same company as her, who become incredibly important to Retsuko's character journey throughout the rest of the series. So you see, it's all connected, and naturally transitions from one story to the next, building upon itself like a linear story does. But if somehow you don't notice that due to some form of sudden severe brain damage, I know I've been there, each episode also works independently as its own narrative without you needing to remember what happened before. And what's equally impressive about that sensible connection between stories is that it applies just as much to the show's themes. I've already briefly mentioned the series' tendency to lean towards mature topics and less of an I'm a 12-year-old that just discovered 4chan way, and more so like it was written by an actual, fully developed adult that's learned a lot over the years of their young adulthood and wants to give advice to the next generation. But the extent to which it can be relatable is out of this world when taking into account its format. From the offset, you'd never come to the conclusion that a series focusing on an overly responsible, death metal singing businesswoman could be regarded as so down-to-earth in the problems that it handles, but that's exactly what it does, and rather than acting as a restriction to the show to be taken seriously or seen as relatable, Agretzko's often cartoony depiction of issues actually works in its favor, and that's because it isn't the situations themselves that are blown out of proportion to cartoonish levels, it's the emotions of the characters and how they react to things. The problems Retsuko and others have to face on their own are pretty mundane, all things considered, but in reality, when you're living your lives, dealing with drama, stress, anxiety, whatever, yours and everyone else's emotions feel really big in the moment. And Agretzko is about capturing that feeling through its humor, through its own brand of creative imagery that can only be done with animation, but most importantly, through its conflicts and metaphors that give sentience to the extreme emotions we all feel during times of stress. After After all, that's why Retsuko goes to karaoke, to let out all she's built up over the course of the day in a sort of release. It's a clear, concise method for her to vent all the feelings she has, something tons of people have various methods for dealing with. And though it'll become a full-on motif across the series, Season 1 in particular uses that method of communication to map out her process of opening up. It begins with Retsuko in a state of complete isolation, not allowing herself to be fully honest with anyone and screaming into a void instead of facing her issues head-on. She allows stress to build up until she explodes, but that doesn't show for anyone around her. All they can see is the responsible, put-together front. And the added stress of keeping that up while hiding her true feelings makes Retsuko hate her job. It's a prison of solitude she's unknowingly created by her own design that continues a feedback loop of misery. So unsurprisingly, when she finally does open up to others, starting with Gori and Washimi, her mindset begins to change. Retsuko realizes that, with the strength given to her by confiding in people willing to listen, she can turn this release of frustration into a statement, a declaration of her feelings in their most primal form to truly get the point of what she's saying across to whoever she's singing about. And for Season 1, the most prominent example of her doing as such occurs, as these moments will go on to do, during the last few episodes, with another office worker she falls in love with for Sasuke, coinciding with another theme about blind love. I already mentioned that in an earlier conflict of the series, Retsuko got the idea to become a gold digger so she could get out of work, leading to wacky shenanigans. And in a way, what I'm about to discuss is a logical conclusion to that. Or I guess more so, it's an evolution. Retsuko has reconciled the main problems she had with her job by this point, using her singing to get through to people, so now that that issue is solved, she doesn't have any reason to go out looking for love other than, well, the sake of it. That and all the people telling her she should be on the lookout in case Mr. Right is just around the corner. So when the opportunity arises, she ends up going on a group singles date, and amidst a flurry of loud party-going, gets formally introduced to Risasuke, an absent-minded space cadet of a person who, to her, stands out for being soft-spoken, introverted, and mysterious. And from there, she falls head over heels. And the style Retsuko uses to demonstrate puppy love is just as well done as how it portrays emotions through music. Getting all lovey-dovey for someone often leads to a super positive change in overall perspective, so Retsuko views Risasuke, and by extension the world, in an unrealistically happy fashion. It comes as a total shock to the system that makes her want to protect that feeling, something many young adults can attest to when moving on to their first serious relationships. But the danger of trying to hold on to this new feeling, as displayed through Retsuko, is that just like how she initially bottled up her feelings to be a pushover at the office, she hides the difficulties to keep living for that dopamine rush. The flaws she was once capable of pushing out have begun to pop up more and more in glaringly obvious ways, but much akin to the fear she has about possibly losing her job, plus her tendency to isolate problems, Retsuko doesn't want to lose Risasuke or what she thinks they have, leading to a burnout that no one around her can help with, but everyone can see, other than, ironically, Risasuke, who's too oblivious to notice. She's basically created a bubble that can't pop until someone gives it to her straight without beating around the bush, and for Retsuko, when that moment finally comes, she's able to do as she once did and let out her true feelings to Risasuke. But it isn't really about showing her true side to him. Risasuke is such an unintentional dunderhead it wouldn't matter what you told him. He'd stare and give her a thumbs up either way. It's about reassuring her own identity to herself, that Retsuko is confident in who she is and can choose the decisions that are best for her. It's a powerful moment unlike anything else in the season that leaves a good taste in your mouth and a feeling of conclusion for her character arc that started all the way back in 101. But hold on a second. Who was it that got Retsuko to see past her rose-tinted glasses and want to face reality to begin with? She wasn't being upfront with Gori or Washimi. Ida and Fineko have been out of the picture as far as their close circle goes, so who would be there for Retsuko in her time of need? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but it was none other than Mr. Tone, the piggish boss of hers that she feared in the beginning and saw as one of her major sources of anxiety. Like, what? How does that make any sense? Well, it all circles back to the first time Retsuko ever had the courage to stick up for herself using death metal, that being against Tone in 107 after a load of buildup. Leading up to this moment, he's been singling out Retsuko as lazy and deserving of bullying ever since he discovered she wasn't happy at her job in 103. He calls her short timer, forces her to take extra shifts, and generally puts greater pressure on her than anyone in the office, and it really gets to Retsuko over time, who vents her frustrations to Gori and Washimi, but also, in learning how to better get onto Tone's good side through Tsunoda, who uses her suck-uppy nature to keep him from flying into a rage, Retsuko learns there's more to him than meets the eye. For sure, he's gruff and intimidating and prone to anger, but looking at him from a positive angle, Tone's also the best there is when it comes to calculating numbers in his department, despite the fact he still uses an abacus while the rest of the crew is on computers. He's a man of his time who had to deal with way harsher bosses that gave him so much worse than what he can dish out, but in the end, he doesn't want to be seen in the same light. He also values certain methods of the past and believes they can work to encourage better performance, which is the real rationale behind why he starts acting way harsher to Retsuko after seeing a video of her anonymously badmouthing him on TV. But it's not on the grounds that she badmouthed her boss. Tons of people are like that. What he hates about it is how the video shows she can be opinionated and out there and confident, yet in the actual workroom she's meek and submissive and totally unmotivated. validated. That's what Tone hates about her to begin with, the utter inability Retsuko has to stand up for herself or just quit her job if she really hates it so much, choosing to opt out instead and look for easy solutions when that's no way for her to get anywhere in life. He wants her to grow a pair and make a fucking decision instead of tiptoeing around. And in episode 107, after loosening his inhibitions through alcohol and thinking his own preconceived assumptions have been validated, he tells her as much through a rap in front of the whole office, humiliating her in the process, and it's such a blow to her self-esteem, Retsuko considers throwing in the towel like she normally does, which inadvertently would have demonstrated Tone to be right about her. But with the support of her friends she's confided in so far, Retsuko finds the courage to do the unthinkable to Tone and rips him apart with no remorse. Of course, no one remembers the event after the fact thanks to how drunk they were, so it appears the status quo hasn't been shaken. However, there is a catch. Tone remembers. But he doesn't reprimand Retsuko for what she did to him. He doesn't hold his position over her. None of what she'd expect to go down does. In fact, he acts as though he doesn't recall the night at all, since whether he's willing to admit it or not, Retsuko sticking up for herself that night surprised him. But more importantly than that, it gave him a reason to finally respect her. And from that point on, he becomes a boss to Retsuko who, while still harsh and occasionally sexist, looks out for her best interests and knows when she's getting into a rut that requires a push. Because Agretsuko doesn't really have villains, it's not two-dimensional like that. It has people that, from your perspective, could seem evil or bad without a closer look, but then when you finally get to know them, there's more than meets the eye. It might sound basic as a moral compared to everything else I've discussed so far theming-wise, but it's just as important for us as we go into adulthood to understand that our bosses and rivals and whatever usually aren't terrible people despite how we most often see them. Plus, disregarding the theme, it's also nice to see a cartoon where the piggish boss and materialistic dunderhead aren't complete morons or just obstacles for the main character to overcome. Helps accentuate Agretsuko's maturity as a series, a theme that sorta translates into the second season, though the opening half was a bit of a bumpy ride.
Season 2, Confused Courageous Cry.
Commencing from almost exactly where the previous one left off, Agretsuko Season 2 follows the same blanket format of the first, which will also go on to be used as a motif in Seasons 3 and 4. Issues pop up in Retsuko's daily life, causing her to look for an escape from it, then she finds unexpected new connections and gets caught up in something she never expected to. We've been over it before, but we also gotta remember that that side of the plot has to be set up and foreshadowed through small moments until it becomes prominent, in this case episode 6. So what does the series choose to focus on before we get there? This is Anai. He's a new hire at the accounting company that Retsuko's put in charge of mentoring when need be, and in the beginning, he seems like an okay guy, just a bit awkward. Everyone's had those instances where they want to look impressive and professional from the moment they start working at a new job. You understand why he's acting this way, and so does Retsuko, who tries to be sympathetic by taking his work on when he looks nervous. But oh dear lord, Retsuko, you done fucked it. Why's that? Well, right after that happens and she has to go home, Retsuko checks her phone to find that Anai has sent her a detailed, threatening email asking for specifics on why she decided to help him, seeing it as condescending. And that doesn't stop at one email, he keeps sending them like a spam bot over and over again waiting for her reply. But it doesn't get any better when she does. Retsuko confronts him about the email, saying that it's unprofessional and annoying. He uses it against her to make it seem like she was bullying him. Retsuko tells her friends what's going on, and Haida tries asking about it. His inbox is filled with emails too. They ask Tsunoda to use her powers of flirtation like she does for Tone. She gets shut down. They bring in Tone himself to straighten Anai out. He leaves defeated with an inbox to match. It's like nothing can stop this guy or appease his rage. But then Kabai appears. You know, the gossiping hippo I mentioned several paragraphs ago for like a second? Yeah, she walks up to see what Anai's doing, compliments the way he makes his lunch, shares some of hers, and just talks. Soothingly. It's not intended to change him, she ironically hasn't heard anything about it, but through giving him a sympathetic touch, one she's developed and honed for many years as a mother of 3, Kabai disarms him non-aggressively, and the next time we see them together, she's helping Anai do the work he'd put off to send out all those emails. But why did her approach work while everyone else's didn't? Simple. Anai is scared. He's scared of becoming an adult, and really, who hasn't been? You spend all this time in school preparing yourself to enter the real world, where you're supposed to be a well-adjusted, functioning member of society that's got all the right answers, but once you're there, you realize, I'm on my own. I've left my parents' house, I've left college, I maybe left my hometown to work for a company. This job represents all I need to be, all I'm expected to be, so if I fail at this job, what am I? What have I been doing? How can I get back on track if I'm failing? Am I a failure? There's no one to help me. I've left that behind. Who do I ask? Where do I go to? The bosses are yelling at me. They aren't supposed to do that. Who do they think they are? I've worked so hard. I've worked too hard to be pushed around. No one's gonna push me around. That's what Anaya is meant to represent. The ultimate culmination of anxiety and hardship and paranoia that society turns some of us into when we enter adult living. And all they're really looking for is someone to push them in the right direction without being forceful or mean. Someone with a gentle touch that can see them as an individual with thoughts of their own. It's a great concept for a character, but I don't gel with the execution, mostly for how Anaya himself is characterized. It's a great concept, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't mean it should be their entire personality. Really, whether or not this type of idea works hinges on the affected person having likable/relatable qualities and traits, demonstrating that they're more than the seemingly spiteful, angry, psychotic person they come off as. And Anaya doesn't have those. As far as positive traits, we come to know that he enjoys cooking and is a super methodical person that can't stand imperfection, but other than that, he's still kind of a dick. Like, spoiler for the next few seasons ahead, it's not really gonna affect anything if you somehow haven't seen it, but once Anaya chills out and he's no longer an active threat, Raicho doesn't know what to do with him. Like, he's there, he's kinda part of the cast, I guess, but he's more of a background ornament that occasionally gets a line or two, then disappears from multiple episodes. And I understand that, his character arc is finished. It's the Gohan from Dragon Ball Z dilemma. Now that he's gone Super Saiyan 2 and defeated Cell, what's left for him to do as a member of the cast? But that shouldn't be where Anaya's story ends, because his character is left at a point where he's still incredibly unlikable. Like, yes, I understand the dilemma. I know what's scary about the prospect of turning into an adult and wanting to keep people from messing with you by acting aggressive. But Anaya's excessive in how much of a dick he is, to an extent that, without a proper explanation for why he has these specific mannerisms, makes me think he's using his lack of experience in the real world as an excuse. What I mean is that if he scared his coworkers off by acting aggressive and tried to do his work but failed since he shooed away anyone that could help him, that's one thing. It could add to his relatability even. But before Kabai comes in, after blowing everyone off, he pretty much stops working, doesn't take assignments when asked, and does nothing but check his emails for hours. He's using the chance to laze off, and what's worse, he never gets called out for any of his bullshit. It's cool he's redeemed with the help of Kabai and becomes less antagonistic, that's fine, but he never faces repercussions for acting like he does towards Retsuko and Haida and all the rest, which irks me to no end for the reason that it caused some intense mental strife that we got to view firsthand. It's possibly the only instance in the show's history where its usage of over-exaggeration for comedic levity works against it. The showrunners amplify all of Anaya's negative traits so far that whenever I see him, I want to punch him in the fucking face. Someone needs to bring him down a peg. That's part of why I'm able to like Mr. Tone. He's humbled by Retsuko in a demeaning fashion, and it feels super good, but it also leads to the two finding a mutual understanding that carries on across seasons to convey he's a good guy despite it all. Anaya never gets that moment, so my anger keeps growing instead of extinguishing, and that makes it so much harder to rewatch season 2. I can't skip over his scenes, they're integral to understanding the other major story arc and theme in the season, but he's also so... I wish I could love him as much as I love the rest of what the season does, especially when it comes to furthering Retsuko's character. In case you forgot, during my unhinged rambling where we left off with her at the end of season 1, through experiencing a one-sided romance with her Sasuke, Retsuko came to terms with the notion that a relationship needs to be built on the foundation of mutual commitment, participation, and love. If one isn't giving enough, the whole dynamic goes off its axis and is unfair to one partner or the other. So you'd think with that revelation, our girl would get the time to slow down and deal with her love life after she's done with Anaya, but unfortunately for her, he's not the only new addition to the cast. Rather, who else but Retsu's own mom shows up to convince her to go on arranged dates with rich men. Why? Same reason Retsuko was so miserable in the first season. An inherent obligation to follow cultural traditions. She's 25 in the prime of her life, yet she hasn't found a husband. So now, to make sure that doesn't stay the case, Mom is here to change it. And aside from giving us additional context as to how Retsuko ended up the submissive, responsible person she was at the beginning of the series, it also demonstrates to us how much she's grown as a character. Remember before, how she was constantly yearning for this exact thing? Well, now that she's gone through a real relationship, she understands that it takes more than money for her to be happy. Life doesn't have any easy outs, she's come to know that isn't what she wants or needs, and so that consistent pestering ends up having the opposite effect, giving Retsuko the realization that she should stop worrying about the future all the time. That's what Anaya did. He couldn't think of anything but how his work in college needed to pay off or else he was a failure, and like Retsuko in season 1, it made him miserable. So she decides to stop living for the future she can't predict. And again, like how Anaya was able to overcome his worries with the help of Kabai, Retsuko finds the courage to pursue a guy she, on a responsible level, would have every reason to avoid. A seemingly poor, loose, friendly guy she met at driving school who couldn't pass his exam no matter what, Tadano. He isn't suave, he doesn't present himself as rich or intelligent, but he's charming. And instead of going to karaoke to vent out her frustrations, Retsu goes to him to talk about it instead. And unlike Sasuke, he listens. He's the mutual relationship she's been looking for. It might not appear like a bright, glamorous, or even easy relationship if he's as poor as she assumes she is, but that doesn't matter. It's what she wants, not what she needs, and that's okay. Retsuko and the audience doesn't need to shoot for big aspirations in love if Billy from the farmer's market is all you're looking for in a partner. It's your happiness, you should get to decide, fabulous or not. Though ironically, by letting her preconceptions go, Retsuko ends up discovering that Tadano is a big tech mogul, the exact kind of thing she used to want and her mom currently wants for her. It's almost too perfect to be true, and it is. Not to say that Tadano is a scumbag or a crook or actually an idiot or unwilling to listen to Retsuko, that's all real, he wasn't faking it, but his core values don't and couldn't match her wants. He's a forward-thinking guy that's got innovation on the brain. He wants to completely eliminate petty jobs and tasks so people can work on things that actually matter to them. In his future, he sees an optimized society where no one has to conform to those kinds of silly rules. But that also includes the idea of marriage and having kids, two things that Retsuko desperately wants. It's not technically necessary for them to be together, she trusts that Tadano loves her, but she wants to get married, no matter how much she tries to fool herself into believing her goals are the same as his, and she wants them to be. She's literally getting everything she could possibly want by being with Tadano. Other than mutual understanding, on account of he never could. Not from a lack of trying, he's just built different. His thought process won't allow him to rationalize that he or anyone else needs something so trivial. What's marriage when he can give Retsuko the world? But she doesn't want the world. She wants to get married. She wants kids, and she knows it isn't what Tadano wants, so she ends the relationship like she did last season with an eye to karaoke, the very method for release she'd previously discarded in favor of talking to Tadano instead. But unlike season 1, this isn't meant to reaffirm her own beliefs to herself. Retsuko knows what she wants. This time, it really is to tell the other person what it is she's feeling and that, respectfully, she knows they can't be together if she wants to be herself. But normal words wouldn't do that. It couldn't tell all the emotion she has to convey. So she sits him down, shows her true feelings to him, and Tadano understands. He understands in a way that he never could have gotten just by talking to Retsi, because while he listened to her, before this point, he never truly understood why she thought differently from him. And that's just another great message added onto a season of him that really goes all in on the complexities of adult relationships as well as what it means to grow up, which we never could have gotten from a character like Retsuko if she hadn't grown so much from the first season. And she's going to continue to grow from here, leading us into the ultimate payoff that makes these past two seasons feel like pure setup in comparison.
Season 3, Heavenly Hum.
So we've had a season where Retsuko learns that there's no easy way of escaping the realities of life, but hard work and the help of loved ones can get us through it, and we've had one where she learns that while not every decision might logically be the best one for her on a financial or social level, that shouldn't discourage her if that's what she truly wants. That means there's only one place we can go from here. Underground Japanese Idols. No, I'm not joking. This is seriously where the series goes for Season 3, and it is a completely valid conclusion for Retsuko's character arc. The way it comes about is that Retsi, after accidentally damaging an underground idol manager's van, chooses to pay it off by being the group's personal accountant, but once the manager discovers her death metal voice by pure coincidence, he decides the group should be remodeled around Retsuko as the main vocalist. So from there, it becomes about whether or not she wants to continue down this road, if she's even allowed to. And in response to me explaining that, you might be wondering, Braxton, you're still way too sexy. Why do you torture us like this by being so handsome? But stay on track, damn it. In all seriousness though, you're probably wondering how that'd be such a great setup for continuing Retsuko's character arc, and to explain that, first I have to point to the new group pushing her forward to pursue the idol path, cause yeah, this season has a whole new cast of characters for our girl to interact with. Mainly though, I want to highlight the manager himself, Hyodo, and the original group leader, Monika, since they both act as great motivators for Retsuko that reinforce the beliefs she previously learned in seasons past. Of course, at first she doesn't see this, only knowing them for the fronts they put up, as she has with several characters before, which makes her feel like she doesn't belong in the same league as these obvious professionals, but in reality that's not the case, and once they see her almost give this up, thinking she isn't cut out for it, they reveal the truth. Monika, the seemingly put-together, diva-ish youngster, is actually older than Retsuko by a year, and when she isn't doing pop stuff, she's working retail. Meanwhile, Hyodo, when he isn't working as the group's manager, does window cleaning as his main profession. They're exactly what Retsuko believes is holding her back from taking the chance and rolling with it, having a regular job and being too old. But they don't let those kind of things stop them because it's their dream. It might not be successful, but they have fun doing it, and they have the drive to keep on passionately, so what's stopping Retsuko other than her own inhibition? It's exactly what seasons 1 and 2 were telling her it was okay to strive for in life and relationships if that's what she wanted, so why not extend that to her personal interests in a way that could show off the side of her she's kept hidden for so long? But Season 3 isn't just about giving us a payoff of the themes built up over the past 2. It's also about displaying that those choices have repercussions, and you can't ignore reality to pretend it doesn't. Whether it's in regular life or in showbiz, making changes to your lifestyle, or in this case the lineup of a group, is going to inevitably have its fair share of people that don't like it or what you've become. They want the old version back, and it's probably not the majority who are saying as much, could be just one person, but damn. That one person really stings. And that's demonstrated amazingly through us viewing Retsuko's rise in popularity as an idol. At first it's all sunshine and rainbows. She's broken out of her shell, become the face of a group where she can be unrestrained and let out her innermost thoughts. There's the possibility that she could turn it into a new revenue source and quit her old job. Not to mention all the adoring fans. But then there's that one guy. You don't know him, you don't recognize him, but he hates you. He hates you for being who you are. There's no way to change it, you're not doing anything wrong, he just hates what you enjoy, and that hatred will never extinguish, no matter how much you try to ignore it. And for Retsuko's situation in the entertainment world, the more popular she gets, the more these kinds of people show up. She can't control them, but she can't just ignore them either. Not when they come right up to her face to say how much she deserves to die. And that really hits home for anyone in the entertainment industry who's gained some bit of success in their careers. Fame can fuck with you so badly if you're not ready for it from the beginning. But what's great about seeing it in this instance is that entertainers aren't the only ones who can relate, because it's not the story of an up-and-coming Japanese idol. It's about Retsuko and her struggles that we can all relate to on a personal level, whether we're going through the same thing she is or not. We've all had people that hate us, and Retsuko is just amplifying it through interesting scenarios that take those issues to their most extreme extent. And so in Retsuko's situation here, it's not solely about having a stalker and choosing between idolhood or her regular job, it's about balancing work and hobbies, knowing when to draw the line, and making sure you have a support group to go to whenever you're in need. And for that last part especially, it's something that Retsuko needs, anchors to keep her from shutting down, but she doesn't have them due to how she is. And for people that have watched the series actively, I can explain what I'm talking about using only 4 words. Remember Haida and Finako? Yeah, I mentioned them once at the very beginning while discussing the first episode of the entire series, but I've barely said anything about them after the fact. So what's the deal? Does the show forget about them amidst Retsuko getting into so much shit? Honestly, no. They've been present in almost every episode, sometimes together with Retsuko, often without. And that's all been intentional leading up to this season. They're the work friends, and Retsuko's decided to leave it, so they're nothing more. Haida and Finako want to be more than that for her, and when given the chance help her out with issues, but it's never directly something that Retsuko says she wants. And that's all due to Retsuko's preconceived notion of responsibility that's always been present. She doesn't want to ask for help on the grounds that it would be a burden to others. She doesn't want to get them involved in her own personal issues. But inadvertently, by doing that, she's isolating herself from others. The bubble of who she's willing to trust enough to discuss her issues with is only large enough for her to fit in, and so Haida and Finako at this point in the story feel useless. As she's so concerned with not bothering them, she's made them feel like they aren't valued. Same with Gori and Washimi. Haida more so than Finako, as he was rejected by Retsuko at the end of Season 1 and chose to take it as a sign that he should be there for her as support instead. Yet he's continually denied. So Season 3 creates an interesting shakeup by giving Haida a co-worker that could end up being his new love interest, Inui. She's smart, into music, likes what Haida does, and she's very interested in being with him. Must be a sign, yeah? I mean, the universe is giving him exactly what he asked for. But as should be abundantly clear by this point, Agretsuko knows that life isn't that simple, so what's the big idea? Is Haida too much of a beta cuck to go for someone that's openly interested in him, missing the chance at a relationship everyone says he should take? Well, not exactly. The show itself knows that on a rational level, Inui is the right choice for Haida if he wants a regular relationship with someone he knows likes him back. But sometimes people just aren't 100% logical. Haida loves Retsuko, he wants to help her more than anyone else in the world, and the basis for why he loves her isn't the most common explanation, but to him it makes way too much sense. It's all about the small things he sees her do that no one else does. Like acting super secretive about taking water from the office back home as though it's some big crime. Just little moments that show Retsuko has more under the surface, which lets Haida empathize with her on a level he can't with others. And those moments continue to build over the years along with his intrigue, so the more secretive she was, the more he wanted to be the one she could feel comfortable opening up to, since he sees how similar they are as people when she peels back the layers. So expecting him to jump ship from her to Inui might seem sensical to others, but to him, it's not. He needs to be there for Retsuko, as do all of her friends that she shuts out during Season 3 while becoming a pop idol. Which leads me into discussing the, by far, best season finale of the show so far. This shit's so epic they couldn't contain it in the regular 15 15 minutes, it had to be 24. If we were talking about some kind of lesser finale, I'd have considered a deviation from the regular runtime to be against the show's signature speed and punctuality, slowing it down when there's no need to. Foreshadowing. But 310 is so absolutely stuffed with content, 24 minutes feels like nothing. It's a perfect amalgam of the season's themes woven from one scene to another in a beautifully natural way, starting with the climax of Retsy's conflict. Remember my whole spiel about people in the entertainment industry always knowing that there are people that'll hate them? But you should. I said that like a few minutes ago. If you don't, there might be something wrong. But for Retsy, it's exemplified in one singular fan that hates her with a passion, one that scares her to the core and makes her feel dirty knowing he's watching. She never says as much herself, but you can just tell how much she's holding everything in, especially as it gets worse and she sees a fake account clearly stalking her. It's getting too serious for her to shrug it off. And any good friend would tell her as much like Monica tries to, but you gotta keep in mind, she's constructed a mind palace meant for one, so Monica's words bounce off Retsy like a wall, failing to reach her right before the moment of impact. In an instant, she's forced to look at the face of her trying to be a team player instead of considering herself. But both thematically and literally, Haida comes in to stop that misconception from consuming her. In taking down the would-be assailant, he demonstrates that responsibility doesn't mean letting herself get hurt, and she doesn't have to face it all alone, which is reiterated and stated more literally right after, since, at first, Retsy doesn't understand what this whole scenario was trying to tell her. All she sees is fear. She's scared, and justifiably so. Someone just tried to kill her. Not just threaten, not just imply, straight up. That could have been the end for her, and we know for a fact at this point that the only way for her to get better is to tear down the wall that put her in that situation to begin with, but she doesn't see that, all she sees is fear. So she builds the wall higher and higher. She stops coming to work, answering her phone, going home. She doesn't feel safe anywhere anymore. She doesn't belong anywhere. It's all been an act this whole time, the responsible office worker, the screaming idol, the considerate friend. Her very being has been shaken so hard she can't see that beneath the layers, she's all those things and more. Haida could tell her that. Gori, Washimi, Finako, Tone, Monica, Tadano, anyone that knows her, but the wall's too high to see anything else. So to her, there's nowhere to go but down. Spiraling, down. But Haida and the crew won't let her be consumed again. He knows what kind of spot she's in, and he knows what she needs to overcome it. The group needs to break the wall before it closes in on her. Sitting around is only going to exacerbate the problem. They need her to let everything out. So they come to Retsuko to bring her where else? Karaoke, the spot that started it all. But unlike finales past, it's not Retsuko that brings another person there. She's the one that's been brought. Because whereas previously, she had to show to others and herself who she truly was, now she needs to be reminded. And the gang trusts Haida to do just that. He's had his own journey of figuring out what he wants to be, what he needs to do, and upon getting reassured through Gori's love test, he's more determined than ever to make it happen. However, Retsuko fights back against it. She still doesn't see beyond the wall, and she doesn't know who she is anymore, so how could Haida? He could never know her. She had no obligation to see Haida the way he does for her. She's never needed to accept his help. But that's not what this is about. It's about her thinking no one can help and pushing away any attempt. So Haida decides to make her open up through a song expressing his own feelings in the style of punk rock, getting her to finally let out the emotions she's kept pent up for so long. And it's messy. She's not coherent at all. There's no explicit meaning. She's just blurting out cries to keep Haida away. She's using it as a last mechanism to scare him off, thinking that once he sees the true her, he'll back away. But he doesn't run. Haida reaches out a hand, and that stops Retsuko in her tracks since no one's ever reached out to her like that before, not in death metal mode, but Haida did. He gave her the hand she thought would recoil if she pushed it away hard enough, assuming the world hates her, so she has to walk alone. But she doesn't. Haida's there. Her friends are there. Her support is there. She just couldn't see it until now. But with the wall broken down, it's so clear. And from there, things finally start returning to some semblance of normal. Retsuko leaves the idol group on good terms, knowing she can't handle that lifestyle, and with a clear head, brings the people she should have felt comfortable holding on to from the start back into her life, now including Haida, who, in retrospect, did understand Retsy more than she assumed. And that's a sign of what was really accomplished this season. A major character flaw of Retsuko that existed from the first episode, her overwhelming refusal to depend on anyone when the chips are down for her, thinking it's the responsible thing to do, has been rectified and addressed. She's gone through a 3-step, naturally evolving character arc, from learning to value herself and the relationships she wants to make with others, to not compromising her wants even if they might not be necessary, to understanding the potential fallout of pursuing her wants, and the need for support if her decisions lead to less than ideal circumstances. It all comes together in a way that lets you know this was the end goal from the beginning for Retsuko as a character, and at the same time, it reflects back on all of us who've been watching, since Retsuko, hopefully, isn't the only one that's grown from watching the show up to this point. We have too. And so, I would have been perfectly content, no more than that, I would have greatly preferred if the series finished at this point, regardless of how much I love seeing these characters. It just makes sense. Retsuko's arc is complete, Haida's arc is complete. There are questions left open, that's for sure, but I feel like they're better left as open questions for us to ponder about in our own lives. Agretsuko said its piece, but it wasn't a rule set, and we shouldn't let ourselves be defined by how these fictional characters conclude their stories. But that's not what happened. Agretsuko returned the next year with Season 4, and it sucks. Like, really hard. It has no reason to exist, yet it exists anyway. To mock me. To mock the last 3 seasons. It doesn't just not add anything, it detracts from what the series is. But before I get to that, I want to do a quick recap of what made the last 3 seasons great overall when put together as a collective, cause they're all great individually, but together, they're iconic. Starting with what I already stated, the themes of the story are always present as the characters continue, to the point that they use their knowledge from those previous lessons while learning new ones. Everything we see them go through has explicit meaning, and could affect how a character perceives a new conflict 2 seasons down the line, so every episode adds value to the show's narrative, whether you can personally relate to it or not, which also gives Agretsuko the interesting distinction of having the ability to create content that isn't directly related to the overarching storyline all the time, but regardless, you don't feel cheated or held on the edge of your seat watching it. Rare Show has virtually created a system in these first few seasons where no episode is truly filler, and that's a massive achievement by anime standards. It really makes me wish other shows could feel so streamlined that there was never a moment that didn't feel important. But Agretsuko does use a strict set of standards to be streamlined as possible, keeping a short runtime with breakneck pacing to make it more easily bingeable. Though the show also has a way of not moving too fast, keeping a mostly chill atmosphere that reminds you of everyday life in that sort of I'm having so much fun with friends we don't notice the time type of way. Seeing as you do really feel like part of the gang as you watch these characters and their relationships develop just like the themes. They never stay the same. Retsuko and Haida overcome their personal issues as they get closer together, the friends react to how they're included or excluded from Retsuko's life for varying reasons, such as in Season 2 when Gori and Washimi are fighting, so Retsuko doesn't feel comfortable coming to them. New characters come in that stay important even after their main purpose in the story has been served, i.e. Haida looking for advice from Tadano in Season 3, Tone continuing to look out for Retsuko after Season 1, Retsuko's mom continuing to be a supportive figure after Season 2, Tsunoda and Kabai offering their own advice whenever it's warranted. Basically, everyone serves a purpose that's tangible and consistent with their skills after their major storylines are completed. You don't see any one character wholly getting left behind. Except for Anai. But he can suck shit. I'm glad he doesn't serve much of a purpose after a story. That's an exception I think was made for the greater good. Though he did contribute to one of the greatest elements of Agretsuko, and that's the music. I don't even need to explain how the series gives us a better look into Retsuko's current feelings through how she uses karaoke. But I'm gonna do it anyway. Besides the obvious implications of looking at the lyrics as an indicator for what Retsuko's wanting to say at that moment, her relationship with karaoke at any given time is a great indicator of how she's doing mentally. Season 1 begins with her alone in the room, unable to show this side of herself to anyone. Fast forward to halfway through the season, she's allowed Gori and Washimi to participate too, airing her grievances to other people for the first time. And after gaining that strength, she uses it as a source of clarity when fighting Tone and explaining herself to her Sasuke. Move on to Season 2, Retsuko's anger, and therefore her rants, shift to her mom and Anai, but she stops going entirely after she meets Tadano and doesn't use the boof again until the end of the season when she tells him what she wants. Then for Season 3, she utilizes her deaf voice to finally break free for once and truly show the world what she is, only for it to be crushed by the hateful fan, forcing her into a submissive state where she couldn't release any of what she built up until Haida and crew brought her to karaoke to remind Retsuko who she was. Very intentional use across the series, but the integration of distinct musical styles to represent personality traits is also present in other characters outside of Retsuko, including Anai, who, when he's in the zone cooking, goes into a techno song, controlled, artificial, and overwhelming, same as his character and obsessive-compulsive desire to make everything perfect. Tone uses old-school rap to put Retsuko in her place, conveying anger, flow, and a willingness not to hold anything back. And of course, Haida uses punk rock when confronting Retsuko to get her to open up, a subgenre characterized as anti-establishment, rebellious, and distinctly honest, all traits that describe how Retsuko views him in the context of the scene. scene. And these integrations are all kept special by restraining them to usually one character a season, letting us know how important they are. Though for season 2, Gori and Washimi also got a number set to their theme music, demonstrating how in sync they are even when fighting. But that's neither here nor there. The point stands. It's great. And this concept as a whole, along with everything else I've described so far, is trash afterwards! They soiled it. Soiled it. Soiled it!
Season 4, screeching siren sounds.
And I know sirens are supposed to be creatures that lure in their prey with harmonious singing to put them at ease before a kill. That's just how badly Aggretsuko Season 4 fails on every level. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, before I go to maximum anger, there's gotta be something this season does decently. Decently! And there is. I suppose. Outside of the main story, which is near completely unsalvageable, Kabai and Tone are given a bigger spotlight than ever before, dealing with the reality of getting laid off after years of working and having trouble adjusting afterwards, and it's nice. I enjoyed watching their parts, as small as they were. Up till now, they've always been viewed in the way that a kid sees their parents, these untouchable figures, for better or for worse, that bestow advice and wisdom beyond their years, never facing their own problems. And so the rest of the cast seeing them struggle can relate back to how young adults start viewing their own parents as people just like them. They aren't evil manipulators or powerful forces, they're human. Or in this case, pigs and hippos. But not like in a negative, in a literal, you know what I'm saying. This guy knows what I'm talking about. And it's nice. Seeing them pushed off to jobs where they don't do anything so they'll lose all motivation and eventually quit is a real problem in Japanese society, and I felt for their characters. Alright, on to Hellfury. So what is this season about? Where are we to go from the end of Season 3? Well, I guess I can tell you, but that doesn't mean I know for sure. I don't think Rarecho knew for sure where to go. I can't imagine he'd have wanted to keep this up if he chose to. Doesn't look like it was part of his plan with how disconnected it all is, but okay, at first, the season decides its main focus wants to be on Haida building up the courage to get with Retsuko, and trust me, it's bad, but we'll get to it later. Cause it's dropped halfway through the season and ends up wholly forgotten for the real, actual story about the CEO getting replaced with a newer, younger one that wants to make some big changes, starting with downsizing. And that's where the few good moments in the season come from. Tone is given the option to choose who stays or goes in the accounting department, and in the end he chooses none. So there's time dedicated to visualizing the generational disconnect between him and the new CEO. How Tone, and by extension the older hires, fundamentally don't fall in line with his plan, while workers like Haida do, so he's pushed up while Tone and Kabai are pushed out. And this is where everything starts getting just a bit too forced. A word I've never used to characterize Aggretsuko in any capacity before, but that's exactly what I need to describe it. The plot demands that, with Haida in a higher position, illegally inflating the company's numbers for the sake of the new CEO's approval, Retsuko wants to stop it, and she needs the help of Tone to figure out how. But Tone's out of a job and needs to work, so he can't be doing whatever for free. So how do you think Retsuko's gonna resolve that? Maybe take some of her pay and give it to Tone, having to live off small rations? Do his work for him at the supermarket so he has the time? Nah. That'd make too much sense. How about they make it so Retsuko's death metal channel she initially used to get a little extra revenue turns into a multi-million subscriber, incredibly popular phenomenon over the time she abandons it? What? Alright, look. Weird, crazy shit happens in Aggretsuko all the time. Retsuko gets together with a billionaire playboy by accident. She joins an underground death metal idol group. But those still felt believable. You understood the progression as to how she got there. It was a plausible series of events that you could accept. But this? Taking a forgotten concept solely meant to act as the catalyst for Hyodo discovering Retsuko has a gift and turning it into a major plot point out of nowhere? It's a straight up contrivance. Internet stardom with a devoted fanbase isn't something a person can just stumble into. One popular video, that's different, it can happen, but finding an audience of millions of subscribers for something as niche as screamo metal without trying and leaving a project dormant for months, that is stupid. Trust me, I would know. I've tried. And on some level, I felt the show understood this exact concept with OTM Girls. It always felt big to Retsuko and the group for how big of an achievement it was to them, but they were never actually all that big. And Season 4 reinforces that when Hyodo comes back into the picture briefly to complain about the group's view counts. The series knew how fame worked, and then it didn't. For plot convenience. That's so weird. But you wanna know what's weirder? The whole plot I mentioned of Haida intentionally ballooning numbers to make them look better after the new CEO asked him to, that's not revealed as a major plot point until midway through episode 9. And that isn't to say major shit doesn't tend to go down near the end of the season. Retsuko falling in love happens in episode 8. Her discovering Tadano's real identity happens in episode 8. The difference with all those being they were already built up over a long period of time to happen, whereas Haida isn't even hinted to be looking for the new CEO's approval until until episode 7. Everything before that was spent on his relationship with Retsuko and the drama surrounding the office's downsizing. Also, Retsuko gets the idea that something's suspicious based off of almost nothing, and the assumption completely contradicts Haida's regular character, which she spent the season getting to know better, so it's poorly set up, and there's no time to substantially develop it. And most of it's spent on a heist to get the data before Haida gets in trouble that goes on for way too long, involving a ton of miscellaneous characters. It's grueling. I've never felt 2 episodes of Agretsuko go on for longer in my life. Wait, they are longer. The finale is 28 minutes. What the fuck? No! That's 2 normal episodes in one, and they spend almost the entire runtime dilly-dallying on this stupid heist instead of the characters it surrounds. Season 3's finale wasn't nearly as long, and it had so much more to say in every regard. You can't follow that kind of finale with one that wastes the viewer's time so fervently, and now that I take a look, most of Season 4 is overly long. 2 or 3 minutes extra consistently might not sound like that much, but in Agretsuko terms, that's a whole 5th added on. They basically jam-packed 12 episodes into 10, despite how easily they could have cut so much unnecessary content out. The extra time ruins the flow Agretsuko's supposed to have. There's too much time for the characters to not do anything. Yet, at the same time, the season drops story arcs and picks new ones up so fast there's not enough time to truly explore any of them, so it all manages to be overbloated and underwhelming at the same time. Speaking of which, you thought they fumbled the bag with the story and pacing, let me introduce you to the themes. Or I would, if I knew what they were. Granted, coming into the season, I didn't know where else there was to go with Retsuko's character that hadn't already been heavily explored, so I was curious to see where Raicho would take her. Turns out nowhere new. He just switched it to be centered around Haida, and I guess that's the best answer we could have gotten. Haida was brought more to the forefront in Season 3, the same season where Retsuko completed her arc, so from there, if she was to pass the torch to anyone, Haida would be the most plausible choice. But what doesn't work about this decision is how, since Haida's arc, though smaller than Retsuko, had also been completed, the only way for them to make it so he can learn new things is by regressing him. And they regress him hard. Forget the confident, self-assured Haida that was willing to air out his feelings to Retsuko and be there for her. He was just acting, I suppose. Now he feels like he's in the background of Retsuko's life among a crowd, watching her instead of being a part of it, so he's scared to be with her and... I'm sorry, isn't it a little too late for this? If Haida expressed these kinds of opinions in the first season, I totally understand, but... anytime after that, it doesn't work. From Season 2 onward, Haida wanted to help Retsuko and be the one she could open up to her about her issues, but she wasn't willing to let him or anyone else in, so he was in the background of her life. He was among the crowd, attempting to get out of it, and he did that. He got out of the crowd by finding the courage to demonstrate to Retsuko that there are people who understand what she's going through, and her life doesn't have to be a one-woman battle. The opportunity window for him to feel insignificant in her life should be closed when he already understood that was the case, and succeeded in getting out of it. He made it to a point where he could play a bigger role in her life. He found the courage. Why is he suddenly so afraid to take the next step? He already did it. Because he feels inferior to Tadano? That he can't live up to the boyfriend that he was or be as amazing? Where's this coming from? That was never a thing for Haida. It could have been made a thing if established early on, as most of Agretsuko's conflicts are, but this is straight up out of left field. I can see Raicho doing his best to give me the impression that Haida feels small, but it doesn't work due to it being obvious that that wasn't the path his arc was taking him. The only reason left for Haida to feel as though he's a part of the crowd is his own reluctance to get with Retsuko. A reluctance he shouldn't have, considering his whole thing in Season 3 was choosing that shit. But let's humor this idea for a minute. Haida feels like he's in the background. How does the season run with it? Well, in a way, after the duo finally cross the line and get together as a couple, the season does try its best to validate Haida's feelings by having Retsuko start asking for advice from Tadano about her death metal channel, hiring Tona's help and working super hard on it without telling him, in spite of the fact that they're dating now. In spite of the fact that Retsuko heard about Haida's fear of being in the background or not measuring up to her and made the step for them to get together in the first place. In spite of the fact that after she makes that step, Haida wants to keep stepping along with her, asking to go to lunch at that one place he was too scared to before, but she turns him down. Why do you do this season 4? Why? You take Haida and rewind him back to a primitive state for the sake of conflict, then you have him grow to get over it, then you have Retsuko, with the knowledge of his insecurities, do all this stuff that makes him feel unspecial again. I can't I can't. But yeah, if you're gonna give him these insecurities he definitely didn't have before, and Retsuko's gonna treat him like she does here, I'm not gonna blame him for looking for validation from the CEO. He's the first person to feed into Haida's ideas and care about the passion he has for his work instead of running off mid-sentence. So how are they gonna resolve Retsuko's naive behavior and Haida's predicament? Cause I can totally see how it could be an honest mistake as long as Haida tells Retsuko his feelings and she lets him know that it wasn't what she intended. Is it possible to strangle an abstract concept like a story? Cause goddamn, I really need to do that right now. Context: Retsuko and crew have pulled off their operation to get the info on Haida's window dressing. He's been found out, and as you'd assume, with him in such a malignant state, he's brought to the karaoke booth where Retsuko's waiting. But already that's kinda weird to me. The karaoke place has always been an important symbol for Retsuko. It has significance to her. She's used it to figure out herself, to open up, to learn lessons. It's intrinsically and narratively relevant to her. But she's not the focus here. Haida is. He's the one going through problems, so if we're going to shift the narrative to be more centered around his issues, why not change up the setting for his revelation? My suggestion: why not the bar he goes to Fineko with all the time? Or if we want to be more private, his apartment where he had important interactions with Retsuko and Inui. We should be doing this in a space that's important to him. Setting it in the same place it's been for the last 3 seasons, one that's important to Retsuko, realistically would only make his insecurities worse, showing he's living in her world and the issues that should be about him are still brought back to her. It's a small detail if you don't think about it, but the first 3 seasons of Agretsuko were all about those kinds of things. The importance that certain environments have in context when they're reused at points in the season. They worked well when the focus was still on Retsuko and her problems, no doubt, but now we're taking a detour into someone else, so the implementation of setting should also change to reflect that. But fine, Retsuko and Haida are at the karaoke bar. There's been almost nothing music related for the entire season, so this must be the moment we've been waiting for. It is time for shit to go down. Retsuko lets Haida in on how she and the group know what's going on so he can stop taking orders from the CEO before he gets in trouble. But Haida tells Retsuko it was actually all his doing in service of looking better to the CEO and measuring up to the standard he believes Retsuko sets. He wanted to prove he was worthy of standing next to her, at least in his head. But more so than that, as the show implies, he really wanted to get validation that he was integral to someone else who valued him the same way he did for them. He thought Retsuko was shutting him out the same way she did when they were co-workers, and with her knowledge of his insecurities now, she should be able to pick up on what she did wrong in retrospect, right? Wouldn't this be the perfect moment for her to acknowledge that? As Haida's belting his guts out, having been unintentionally neglected by her in a way that made him seek the validation of the CEO, doing anything to achieve that validation? Apparently not, because Retsuko says no one thinks he's just a background character, tells him not to use her as an excuse for seeking validation, and instead of keying up a song, she slaps him. But this is all fucking wrong, mostly just for the reason that while she may have told Haida no one, including her, thinks of him as a background character, that rings pretty hollow when she doesn't bring up examples, an explanation, anything at all. Up to this point, Agretsuko has known ending a conflict by saying, "That's not the case," has never been enough in a complex adult situation. We need context, nuance, and we need Retsuko to acknowledge the part she played in this. I'm still caught up on that. But if she's not gonna do that, the least she could do is mention Haida's positive qualities, remind him what's so unique about him as a character, all he's done to help her, how important he is to her, give us parallels to what happened seasons prior. This is the perfect moment to do that, and we get... But I guess that solves everything, so Haida goes and confronts the CEO with a newfound determination, having come to his senses, or some shit like that. But uh-oh, the CEO still wants to go forward with the window dressing, assuming he can make a deal, so Haida has to put him in his place through an arm wrestling match, proving his dominance over the CEO in conviction. And yet again, we hit a wall. There isn't 10 minutes left in the finale and we've come to another goddamn stop. But this is so stupid for so many reasons I've got to point it out. Story of my life, I guess. Firstly, why should this have meaning to the CEO? We know it has value to Haida, as arm wrestling has been his way of testing dominance over others across the season, but why should it have relevance to the CEO? I mean, how much do we know about the CEO to begin with? He's tidy and calculative and driven in a way that could be viewed as a negative mirror to Tadano, but when it comes to unique character attributes, the CEO doesn't have much to go around. As a villain, he's rather bland. On a character level, he's not too stand out. And thematically, he hasn't got too much going for him other than a commentary on the toxicity of modern forward-thinking businessmen. But that doesn't say too much about him as a person. Arguably the most integral element of any Agretsuko antagonist antagonists good or bad. They all have characters beyond the qualities that make them villain-like to our main leads, but the new CEO, I don't know enough about him or his internal struggles to make a judgment on that, and unlike Toner and I, where their defeat or reconciliation happened a few episodes before the end of the season, giving us room to see how they changed, the CEO losing is only a few minutes before the ending, and he's only briefly mentioned after this interaction, so he remains insignificant in my eyes. And I know that wasn't the intent, as on the poster for this season, he's looking back at Haida and Retsuko as though he's some kind of Emperor Palpatine-esque figure. He was meant to be something, but then he wasn't. So I can't see why he'd think losing at arm wrestling would be enough to change his mind or step down. It might have made sense if there was an arm wrestling match between Haida and the CEO prior, but there's realistically no reason for him to stop if that's the path he wants to take, regardless of Haida's triumph. But it isn't Haida's triumph either, is it? It starts out that way, and then when he doesn't do it quick enough, Retsuko takes the victory from him. Also, unlike every other instance of Retsuko's death metal screaming, this time it actually has real-world effects and puts both Haida and the CEO in the hospital. Also, the CEO steps down after, and it's left ambiguous what Retsuko and Haida's relationship is like. I've tried to wrap my head around this ending so hard. I want to understand it, I do, but I've watched this episode no less than 5 times and I still can't get it. This episode, and really the whole season, defies analysis, and by the time it was finished, almost every change, choice, and new addition had been undone. You know how every season from 1 to 3 has had major changes that stuck as they kept going? Season 1 introduced Gorian with Shimi, changed Tone's dynamic with Retsuko, and had Haida confess, leading to a change in his prerogative. Season 2 gave us Anai, Tadano, and Retsuko's mom. Season 3 gave the OTM girls, Hyodo, and shook up Retsuko's relationship with Haida. You know how they were all interesting and stayed relevant after their prominent stories concluded? Season 4 had almost none of that. As far as additions, we get the new CEO, and that's about it, unless you want to count the comedic yes-men sidekicks that don't matter. Now, I've already told you why the CEO was a bad, underdeveloped, unimportant villain in the grand scheme of things that goes against your typical Agretzko antagonist, but also, every impact he makes at the company ends up being void. Kaba and Tone are fired from the company, not at the end of the season they're not. The old CEO has to step down so the spot's empty with the new CEO to fill it. Nah, the old CEO got better, he's fine, he's okay. The new CEO moves Haida up in the company, he quits, and I'll give the show credit, that's some kind of change that lasts. And it looks like the final season will focus on his search for meaning after, so yay, they did it. They made one change that actually had weight to it, even though it came out of nowhere. Though that reminds me, the first half of season 4 having to do with Retsuko and Haida's relationship that ended up not mattering in the latter half. Wow, that sucked. They had to rewind Haida's character back to before season 3 so the conflict of him dating Retsuko could keep going, and when they finally crossed the line between episode 5 and 6, they did nothing. Literally nothing. Or I guess that isn't true, they drove in a car and hung out as happy music played to give us the impression that they were dating, but in the context of the rest of the season afterwards, it's as though Rarecho forgot, like, oop, done with that. Retsuko and Haida are together now. Anyway, on with the next plot, but the next plot doesn't bring up their relationship more than once. From what I can tell, there's one instance where Haida meets up with Inui again and she mentions that Retsuko's his girlfriend now, but outside of that, it's barely touched upon at all. Why choose to go ahead with it in the story, only to forget it in the long term? It's like Rarecho was obsessed with making more changes than he ever had before, but he got scared and backed away, so in the end, it freed the season of consequence, and therefore, aside from Haida leaving, might as well have never existed at all. And that's the worst thing about season 4. Instead of moving the plot, characters, setting, and themes forward, it did everything in its power to make a case for why it didn't need to exist. It regressed every change it made, couldn't get a grip on any particular themes that connected to the previous ones, and certain characters are so totally unlike themselves they might as well be separate. There's no reason to watch Agretzko season 4, but in the end, I know it's there, and it always will be. Dude, this show has gone on for too long. The series had ideas it wanted to progress through, it did that. The series had a flawed character that needed to overcome problems existing from the crushing responsibilities she felt thanks to society's ills. She got past them. Everything it wanted to say was said. And it kept going. For creative reasons, I don't know. It doesn't feel that way. Season 4 reeked of throwing everything at the wall when there was nothing else to do and seeing what stuck. But then when stuff did start to stick in a way that the creator didn't like, he hosed the wall off and started over instead. The series doesn't have much of a plan, which is why I'm glad it's ending with one last hurrah coming out this February that seems even more focused on Haida than ever before, basically turning him into the main character. Maybe it'll find a way to redeem season 4, maybe it'll do its own thing, maybe it'll crash and burn the same way. I'm just glad it's ending before it can go any further down the drain. But hey, we still have that perfect trilogy of seasons left to watch, and if Star Wars fans can pretend part of the franchise doesn't exist, why can't I? Keep screaming on, you beautiful bastards. I've been Just Stop. You've been yelling your heads off. Peace out. Oh, the Rare Cho, I will totally forgive you if Haida and Finico getting together becomes canon. Come on, man, just do it for me.